Rebecca Callahan stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of her corner office, 36 stories above the city. The glass reflected her image back with a kind of cold precision only expensive architecture could provide. Platinum hair pinned into a flawless twist. Ice blue eyes that could freeze a merger negotiation mid-sentence. A tailored suit worth more than the average car payment for a year. The reflection was perfect. The woman inside it was not. It happened every morning, always at 9:47, without fail. She didn't check the clock anymore. Her body knew the minute by muscle memory. That's when it came. The sound of tearing metal, the acrid bite of burning rubber, the weight of steel crushing her legs. And then, just as the edges of her vision went black, gray eyes. They had been steady, unshaken by the chaos around them. A voice, calm, certain, had anchored her there. Stay with me. What's your name? Rebecca. Beautiful name. I'm getting you out. Trust me. The rest was fragments. The heat of his hands working the wreckage, the glint of a scar near his left wrist, the sensation of being worth saving. Something she'd never felt before, even from the people who claimed to love her. It had taken 43 minutes for him to free her. The official report said so. But in her mind, those minutes didn't exist on any clock. They lived in a suspended space where there was only his voice, her name, and the certainty that she would live because he said she would. And then nothing. The paramedics had arrived. The scene had exploded with sirens and strangers, and her gray-eyed savior had vanished before she could even ask his name. No handshake. No thank you. No way to find him. He had become a ghost in her story, the most important person she had ever met, and the one she knew nothing about. That was 18 years ago. In that time, she had done what survivors do best. She built. She built an academic record, so perfect her professors whispered about it in faculty lounges. She built her first company out of a dorm room with 2 borrowed computers and a supply chain algorithm that outperformed the competition by weeks. Sold it before she turned 25. Her second venture, AI for financial markets, went public at 30 and made her worth 9 figures. The third company shattered corporate data security models and crowned her a billionaire. She had conquered industries the way generals conquer territories, methodically, strategically, without leaving anything to chance. The city below wasn't a skyline to her. It was a map of her victories. But there was one battle she had never won. In private, Rebecca hunted for her ghost. She kept a private investigator on retainer for years, even when there were no leads to follow. She scanned every crowd, every boardroom, every airport lounge for a familiar face. She dated executives, politicians, athletes, artists, but no one measured up to a memory that had become part of her DNA. Every man eventually noticed that she wasn't fully there. Some accused her of being distracted, others of being cold. A few diagnosed her with problems she'd already paid therapists to label. What none of them understood was that she'd left a piece of herself in that train car. The man who had saved her hadn't just pulled her from a wreckage. He had pulled her into a new life. And she couldn't rest until she looked him in the eye again. 3 years ago, she stopped pretending it was just a hope. She made it a mission, a $50 million mission. Her board called it personal security consulting in the annual budget, a polite euphemism for the most expensive missing person search in private sector history. She'd hired Thomas Crawford, a former FBI legend with an encyclopedic knowledge of databases, human behavior, and the ways people vanish. His team searched across military records, emergency service logs, and obscure government archives. They analyzed voice patterns from her recollection, cross-referenced facial features, even consulted trauma psychologists to build a composite profile. The search spread like an invisible net across the Northeast. Every firefighter, medic, and police officer from that night interviewed. Every yearbook, personnel file, and rescue report combed through. Dozens of false leads burned through months of work and millions in funding. Rebecca didn't care. Money was the least valuable resource she had. What she was short on was time. From the outside, she remained the unstoppable CEO, decisive, calculating, impossible to intimidate. But in the quiet moments between meetings, her thoughts circled the same image, gray eyes in the dark, hands working with unshakable purpose. She had never let herself imagine what it would be like to find him. She only knew she would. And when she did, she would say the one thing that had stayed lodged in her throat for 18 years. Thank you. Behind her, the digital clock on the conference room wall clicked over to 9:47. Somewhere deep in her mind, the screech of metal began again. And Rebecca Callahan, billionaire innovator and queen of her own steel and glass empire, stared into the window and into the past, still chasing the ghost in the glass. At precisely 11:30 every night, Marcus Garrett pushed a scuffed maintenance cart down the marble corridor of Callahan Tower. His pace was unhurried but purposeful, the quiet efficiency of a man who belonged exactly where he was, or at least looked like he did. To most people, he was just another night janitor in a company so vast that entire teams could vanish for weeks without anyone noticing. The uniform, the ID badge, the faint smell of industrial cleaner, all camouflage. Marcus knew the truth about invisibility. It wasn't about staying hidden in the shadows. It was about convincing people they had no reason to look at you in the first place. He'd been perfecting that skill for 15 years, across 3 continents, in places where being noticed could mean you didn't live to see morning. From a distance, nothing about him screamed danger. He was tall, yes, but lean, built like someone who could run for hours rather than lift heavy weights. His gray eyes were unremarkable unless you knew what to look for. The way they never stopped moving, cataloging doorways, calculating sightlines, noting who was where and why. Tonight, like every night for the past 3 years, his real job wasn't cleaning. It was her. Rebecca Callahan, CEO, Target. The reason he'd traded battlefields for boardrooms. Marcus's first glimpse of her, after nearly 2 decades, had been from the edge of a security monitor in the basement surveillance room. The image was grainy, but the way she carried herself, as though the entire floor bent to her will, was unmistakable. He'd read her file before taking the assignment, but paper didn't prepare you for presence. She'd built an empire while he'd been moving through the world's underbelly. And here she was, walking past him without a flicker of recognition. That was fine. In fact, it was necessary. The night he pulled her out of the train wreck had never left him. He could still smell the scorched metal, hear the uneven rhythm of her breathing. He hadn't meant to vanish afterward, not at first. But when federal investigators started asking why a National Guard trainee happened to be first on scene at an accident involving the daughter of one of the Defense Department's biggest contractors, Marcus had realized how dangerous proximity to her could be. 8 months of suspicion taught him a rule he lived by ever since. Sometimes the best way to protect someone was to disappear from their life entirely. After the derailment, he went where people like him were always needed: Afghanistan, Iraq, Somalia. Places where saving a life could mean taking 1 second later. He became the guy you called when normal security measures weren't enough, when the threat was too quiet, too skilled, or too close for comfort. That's how he ended up here, cleaning floors outside her office, while keeping 3 different surveillance feeds running in his head. Callahan Tower wasn't just an office building. It was a chessboard. Rebecca's rivals weren't content to fight her in boardrooms. They wanted her out of the game entirely. Some threats were blunt instruments, like the ex-employee they'd caught outside her building with a loaded handgun. Others were subtler: a maintenance worker planting micro-cameras in elevator shafts, an assistant with organized crime ties buried under a polished resume, a delivery driver mapping her movements for someone who didn't send flowers. Marcus had removed each of them with surgical precision. None of the incidents had ever made it to her inbox. That was the point. But in the past year, something had shifted. Her search for the man who saved her was no longer just personal. $50 million could move mountains, and triple arms in the wrong mountains entirely. Foreign intelligence services had started sniffing around her inquiries. Organized crime syndicates had flagged her as a leverageable asset. Even certain corporate entities saw her fixation as a pressure point to exploit. The irony wasn't lost on him. In trying to find the man who protected her, she was making it harder for him to protect her at all. His orders from Meridian Protective Services, the private firm contracted by her board, were blunt. Shut down the search, or the protection detail would be considered compromised. In this business, compromise could mean replace the asset, sometimes permanently. Marcus wasn't about to let that happen. He'd spent 3 years making sure Rebecca never knew how close she'd come to dying, not in the train wreck, but in the quiet, everyday moments afterward. And now, the only way to keep her alive might be to reveal himself. Controlled exposure. Give her enough truth to stop looking, but not so much that she could be used against him. The thought was dangerous. Not because he doubted his ability to keep her safe. He'd survived war zones that chewed up men better than him, but because he wasn't sure what seeing her again, face to face, would do to him. 3 years of watching her from the periphery had been harder than he expected. He knew her walk, the way she held her coffee cup, the subtle change in her posture when a meeting went badly. He'd seen her laugh with her assistant, Margaret, in moments no one else would remember. He'd watched her alone in her office at night, staring out the window like she was waiting for something she couldn't name. The truth was, he'd been waiting too. Invisibility had kept her safe so far. But the longer her search went on, the more that invisibility became a liability. Marcus parked his cart outside the executive floor's service entrance and glanced at the small watch strapped to the inside of his wrist. 11:37. Rebecca was likely still in her office, chasing whatever problem refused to let her go home. For now, he would keep cleaning. For now, the ghost in her story would remain a ghost. But soon, he would have to decide if protecting her meant stepping into the light. Rebecca Callahan believed she was closing in. The search reports Crawford's team delivered to her desk were thicker every month. Lists of interviews, cross-referenced names, grainy photos from municipal archives. She told herself the lack of results was temporary. That $50 million could peel back any veil. All it took was patience and persistence. What she didn't see was how her hunt looked from the outside. Marcus saw it clearly. From the moment she'd wired the first payment to Crawford's private investigation unit, a ripple had gone out through circles she didn't even know existed. Some of those ripples reached places where curiosity about the wrong person could get you killed. At first, it was subtle. Database queries she commissioned triggered automated alerts in government systems, the kind used to monitor unusual information requests. Certain names her investigators dug into appeared on watch lists. Then came the digital shadows. Someone was intercepting fragments of her team's emails. Not enough to be obvious, but enough to map the outlines of what she was searching for. Marcus recognized the pattern. Tiered surveillance. The kind hostile intelligence agencies used to track a target without tipping them off. And she had no idea. In her mind, the danger was theoretical. The way a hunter imagines the forest is empty until the first rustle in the dark. But Marcus could already hear the rustling. It escalated fast. An unmarked van appeared twice in the same week on the street behind Callahan Tower, always between 9 o'clock and 9:15 a.m., always idling long enough to be noticed by someone paying attention. A supposed HVAC inspector signed in with credentials that should have cleared only maintenance levels, but somehow got access to the executive floor. One of Crawford's junior investigators, a clean-cut kid who thought private security was glamorous, found himself cornered by 2 men in a hotel parking lot. They didn't hurt him. They just asked what it would take for him to hand over his client list. The message was clear. Rebecca's search wasn't just drawing attention. It was baiting predators. Marcus started shifting his routines. Cleaning rounds became reconnaissance runs. He rerouted his patrols through the building's server rooms, checking for unauthorized devices. He lingered longer near elevator bays, scanning for the same faces appearing too often in the wrong places. Every night, he swept the executive floor for bugs, audio, video, network taps, finding 2 in the span of a month. He didn't tell Rebecca. Not yet. The second she knew, her board would know, and then Meridian would know, and Meridian's orders had been unambiguous. If her behavior jeopardized the operation, they'd resolve the problem. He'd been on the other end of that order before. He knew what it meant. Crawford wasn't stupid. The man had enough field experience to know when something didn't add up. One afternoon, Marcus caught him in the lobby watching the cleaning crew, not the executives, as they moved between floors. Crawford didn't say anything, but his eyes followed Marcus a second too long. Marcus filed that away. Crawford was starting to see the edges of the truth. If he connected those edges, the whole cover could unravel. That night, Marcus reviewed the last 18 months of Rebecca's investigation from his own surveillance cache. All the names she chased, the interviews, the databases. It was worse than he'd thought. A cluster of her queries had pinged an internal system used by a joint intelligence task force. That meant at least one alphabet agency knew her search touched someone in their files, and Marcus had no doubt who that someone was. He'd kept her alive for 3 years by being invisible. Now her determination to find him was lighting flares over both of their heads. The situation was becoming unsustainable. He went back to something an old instructor had told him during a counter-surveillance course in Kabul. If you can't stop the hunt, control the kill zone. The kill zone, in this case, wasn't literal, not yet. It was the moment they came face to face. If she was going to find him, it had to be on his terms, in a place where he could manage what happened next, and who knew about it. Marcus began planning the reveal. He mapped every point in her daily routine where she could be isolated without raising alarms. The parking garage made the most sense. Private, camera coverage, he could manipulate, easy exits. He timed her arrivals and departures for 3 weeks, noting which days she came in alone, which days her assistant shadowed her. Meanwhile, he started leaving faint breadcrumbs, small details in her periphery that might draw her attention without confirming anything outright. A turn of the head that let her see the edge of his scar. A brief exchange in the elevator where his voice slipped into that calm, measured cadence she'd remember, even if she couldn't place why. If she was going to connect the dots, he wanted it to feel like her discovery, not his confession. By the end of the month, the risk calculus was shifting too fast. The wrong people were getting too close. The hunter, Rebecca, didn't realize it yet, but she was no longer the one in control. Her search had made her a target, and the net was tightening. The only question left was whether Marcus could step into the open before someone else got to her first. The message came in at 6:42 a.m. A number she didn't recognize. 5 words. Parking garage. Level B3. Alone. Rebecca stared at it over the rim of her coffee, pulse ticking faster than she wanted to admit. Crawford had drilled her for months on how to respond to unverified contacts, delete, report, investigate from a distance. But something in her gut didn't want to hand this over to him. She typed nothing, just finished her coffee, slipped the phone into her bag, and went to work. By 7:20 a.m., her heels were clicking across the concrete ramp into level B3. The garage was colder than usual, lit in long strips of fluorescent hum that painted everything the color of wet cement. The smell of oil and exhaust hung heavy. She saw him before he moved, leaning against a black sedan in the far corner, hands in his jacket pockets, posture loose but not careless. Civilian clothes, dark jeans, gray jacket. But there was something in the way his eyes swept the space behind her that screamed trained. For a moment, she almost convinced herself she'd dreamed him into being. He pushed off the car and walked toward her. "Thanks for coming alone." His voice, lower now, rougher at the edges, still carried the steady tone she remembered from the wreck. Rebecca's throat tightened. "It's you." A small pause. Marcus Garrett. He said it like he was giving her something real. Maybe the first real thing in a long time. "That's not the name I've been looking for," she said. "No," he agreed. "The one you've been looking for would get us both killed." They stopped a few feet apart. The space between them felt like it held all 18 years at once. The smoke, the sirens, her name in his voice. She looked at him hard, cataloging the lines at the corners of his eyes, the scar she'd imagined 100 times, the way he seemed to stand without ever fully relaxing. "Why disappear?" she asked. "Because, after Hartford, the people asking about me weren't the kind you want to meet," he said. "And your last name draws attention. The wrong kind." Her mind raced. "You've been here the whole time." 3 years, 4 months, 16 days, Marcus said without hesitation. Your board hired Meridian Protective Services after that thing with the gunman outside your building. I saw your name on the file and requested the assignment. She blinked. The janitor. The janitor's a good cover. Gives me access to every floor without anyone thinking twice. Lets me see who doesn't belong. Rebecca shook her head. All this time, and you never said anything? If I told you, you'd have kept digging. And your digging has already set off alarms in circles that make your corporate rivals look friendly. He leaned in slightly, voice dropping. Rebecca, there are people watching your search who don't care about the man you're trying to find. They care that you'd spend $50 million chasing a ghost. That tells them you have a vulnerability, something they can use. Her instinct was to argue, to say she could handle it. But something in his eyes stopped her. They weren't cold, but they were unflinching. What happens if I keep looking? She asked. You draw fire, Marcus said. From people you can't see, who don't play by your rules. And eventually, I won't be able to shield you from all of it. He took a slow breath, like he was weighing whether to give her the next part. I'm offering you a choice. Disappear with me for 6 months while I clean up the mess your search has made. Or go back upstairs and pretend this conversation never happened. But if you choose that, you won't see me again. Her pulse thudded in her ears. Disappear, she repeated. No phone, no board meetings, no headlines. Off the grid completely. I've got a safe house in Vermont. No one finds us unless I let them. And my company? It survives without you. You built it that way. You'd be back before the seams even showed. She crossed her arms. And what do you get out of this? Marcus didn't look away. I get to finish what I started 18 years ago. Rebecca stood there, the echo of the wreck pressing at the edges of her mind, his hands on twisted steel, his voice keeping her awake. This isn't a rescue anymore, she said. No, Marcus said quietly. It's a choice. And this time, you know what you're choosing. She looked past him at the black sedan, the darkened exit ramp, the yawning mouth of the unknown. Then back at the man who had been both ghost and shadow in her life. All right, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Let's go. Marcus's jaw shifted slightly, maybe relief, maybe resolve, and he opened the passenger door. As she slid into the seat, Rebecca realized something unsettling. For the first time in 18 years, she wasn't thinking about finding him anymore. She was thinking about what came next. The garage exit swallowed them in shadow. And then they were on the highway, the city falling away in the rearview mirror. Rebecca sat in silence, hands folded in her lap. The hum of the tires filled the space where she should have been asking questions. She wasn't sure which ones would get answers, or which answers she was ready to hear. Marcus drove like a man who understood how roads worked at more than face value. He stayed 2 cars behind commercial trucks when possible, changed lanes without warning, and adjusted speed in increments that seemed meaningless until she realized they were always in someone else's blind spot. She thought of Crawford, of her board, of the assistants already wondering where she was. Then she thought of message on her phone, alone. She'd left the device on her office desk, powered down. Margaret would assume it was a meeting day. The board would assume she was in transit. By the time anyone started asking real questions, she would be gone. They crossed into Vermont before she spoke. You counted the days, she said quietly. Marcus didn't glance away from the road. Of course I did. Why? A pause. Because I knew sooner or later you'd make this harder than I could manage from the shadows. She stared at him. 3 years, Marcus. You could have stopped this search the day you saw me. That wouldn't have stopped you. It would have made you louder. And the louder you got, the faster you'd have attracted the kind of attention we're dealing with now. Rebecca leaned back, eyes on the passing trees. And this attention, what exactly are we running from? Not running, Marcus said. Buying time. Time for the people who flagged your search to lose interest, for me to erase certain footprints, and for the ones who won't let go to be persuaded. Persuaded, she repeated. His mouth twitched like he might smile, but didn't. The kind of persuasion that ends a problem permanently. The safe house was a weathered farmhouse at the end of a gravel road, tucked between two ridges dense with pine. No mailbox, no visible neighbors, no signal bars on her phone, not that she had it anymore. Inside, it was spare but deliberate. 2 bedrooms. A kitchen stocked with basics. A fireplace stacked with wood. Windows that could be blacked out in seconds. She noticed the reinforced locks, the thick curtains, the unobtrusive vents that were probably more than air ducts. "You've done this before," she said. "More times than I wanted to," Marcus replied, setting a duffel on the table. "This place is clean. No surveillance, no paper trail. Supplies for 6 months, if we stretch them." Rebecca moved to the window, staring out at the tree line. "So what happens now?" "We sit here until the world forgets me." "Not forgets," Marcus said, unzipping the bag. Inside were neatly folded clothes, all neutral tones, all her size. "Forgets the parts of you they can use. Your search, your obsession with finding me. Anything that makes you predictable." She turned from the window. "And in the meantime?" "In the meantime," Marcus said, meeting her eyes, "we tell each other the truth." The first few days blurred into a rhythm that felt alien to her. No morning calls. No scrolling through reports over coffee. No meetings or emails or headlines. She woke to the sound of wind through the pines and the quiet movement of Marcus somewhere in the house. He cooked simply, eggs, toast, coffee, and watched her like he was still on a protection detail. She caught him scanning the tree line, checking locks, testing the radios he'd set up in case they needed to move without warning. On the 4th night, they sat by the fire. "You're not what I imagined," Rebecca said. Marcus glanced at her. "What did you imagine?" "A hero," she admitted. "Someone untouched by the kind of compromises the rest of us make." "I'm not untouched," he said flatly. "And I've made more compromises than you'd want to hear about." "Then why stay?" she asked. "Why take this assignment at all?" He was quiet for a long time. The fire popped. "Because when I pulled you out of that train car, you didn't look at me like a soldier or a stranger. You looked at me like someone worth trusting. I don't get that often." Her chest tightened, but she pushed it aside. "What happens after 6 months?" "That depends," Marcus said. "If I've done my job right, you go back. And this," he gestured between them, "goes back to what it was before." She shook her head slowly. "That's not possible. I can't unknow you now." "Then you'd better decide if knowing me is worth the cost," Marcus said, his gaze steady. "Because the cost is never small." Days passed. She learned the way he moved through a space, not casually, but with purpose. She noticed the small scar near his wrist was deeper than she remembered, and that he always positioned himself so he could see the door. At night, she sometimes caught him outside, standing still in the dark, listening to the woods. She didn't ask what he was listening for. By the 2nd week, Rebecca realized something unnerving. The search she'd poured 18 years and $50 million into was over. Not because she'd found exactly what she wanted, but because she'd found exactly what she'd been running toward without knowing it. The danger wasn't gone. Marcus made that clear. But for the first time since the wreck, she wasn't chasing. She was choosing. And in choosing, she understood the shadow road ahead might be the most dangerous thing she'd ever walked, and the only one worth taking.